The 4 a.m. cold was a thief, but Franklin, 74, had a deeper battle. His body was turning to stone, yet each dawn he knelt in a secret park clearing. There he transformed discarded leaves into breathtaking, ephemeral art, destined to vanish. What compelled this quiet rebellion against decay? The 4 a.m. cold was a thief, stealing the breath from Franklin's lungs. It was a familiar larceny, one he'd grown accustomed to since the diagnosis. Pulmonary fibrosis, the doctor had said, a slow hardening, like concrete setting where it shouldn't. At 74, Franklin knew all about concrete. He'd spent 50 years commanding it, shaping it into buildings that scraped the sky. Now, his own body was turning to stone from the inside out. He shuffled along the deserted pavement, his gnarled hands gripping the handle of a simple garden rake. His destination was Laurel Creek Park, a place most of the city wouldn't see for another 3 hours. He wasn't heading for the manicured rose gardens or the cheerful playground. His sanctuary was a secluded clearing, a forgotten pocket of the park sheltered by a grove of old sycamores. This was his hallowed ground. It was a promise made to a leaner in the quiet twilight of her life. "Don't just let the world go gray, Frank," she'd whispered, her hand in his. "Find the color, even in the fallen things." And so he did. Kneeling on the damp earth, a familiar rebellion in his joints, he began his work. He was not a cleaner, but a creator. He was a cartographer of decay, mapping beauty onto the transient. With the patience of a stonemason, he began to sort the previous day's fallen leaves. The deep reds of the oaks, the mottled gold of the sycamores. Slowly, under the weak glow of a distant street lamp, a pattern began to emerge. It was a sprawling Celtic knot, its interlacing ribbons of gold and crimson a silent sermon written in nature's script. He had to finish before the sun, before the city's leaf blowers arrived to blast his ephemeral masterpiece into oblivion. For a man who had spent his life erecting monuments of concrete and steel, there was a profound, painful peace in building something meant only to be swept away. Dana, at 31, ran to escape the suffocating inertia of her life. As an environmental project coordinator for the city, her days were a slow grind against indifference. Her latest passion project, a plan for a rooftop community garden on a municipal building, had been languishing in committee for 6 months, buried under a mountain of procedural nonsense. Her life felt like that proposal, full of good intentions but going nowhere. So every morning before sunrise, she would lace up her running shoes and race along the main path of Laurel Creek Park, the rhythmic pounding of her feet a temporary reprieve from the futility that nipped at her heels. One Tuesday, her routine was shattered. A boisterous golden retriever, off-leash and ecstatic with freedom, bounded directly into her path. Dana swerved instinctively, stumbling off the paved trail and into the damp undergrowth of the sycamore grove. The air in the grove was still and smelled of damp earth and decay. As she caught her breath, annoyance turning to resignation, her eyes fell upon a disruption in the chaos. It wasn't litter. It was a statement, a silent, breathtaking declaration of order. There on the ground, stretching across a clearing at least 20 feet wide, was a perfect, swirling spiral. It was composed entirely of leaves, meticulously arranged by color, from the dark, almost black, leaves at the center to the pale yellow ones at the outer edge. The precision was staggering. She could see the immense labor it represented, the hours of patient selection and placement. Her first thought was of art students, but this felt different, less like a project for a grade and more like a form of devotion. She smiled, a genuine smile that felt foreign on her face, took a quick photo with her phone and continued her run, a new lightness in her step. She'd half expected it to be a one-time fluke. But the thought that she might see something new, another secret message from the universe, propelled her out of bed the next morning. She deliberately took the same detour. The spiral was gone. In its place, a magnificent bird, its wings outstretched as if in mid-flight, was rendered in shades of amber and rust. The bird wasn't just an outline. It had texture and depth. the darker leaves forming the shadow under its wing, a single bright yellow leaf placed perfectly for its eye. The day after, it was a complex geometric pattern that seemed to hum with a silent, mathematical energy. This anonymous artist, this leaf whisperer, as she began to call them in her head, was having a more profound conversation with her than anyone in her life. It was a daily dose of proof that one person could, against all logic and for no apparent reward, create something beautiful. It became her anchor, a secret point of light that reoriented her entire day. The obsession took root, weaving itself into the fabric of her week. Dana found herself checking the weather forecast with an anxiety usually reserved for a critical project deadline. A severe storm system was moving in, predicted to hit Monday night with heavy rain and gale-force winds. All day, she pictured the delicate leaf bird being torn apart, its meticulously placed feathers scattered into a meaningless brown mess. The thought caused a surprisingly sharp pang in her chest. This anonymous art had become more than a curiosity. It was a fragile symbol of resilience, a testament to quiet dedication in a loud, careless world. She felt a strange, fierce need to protect it. Sleep eluded her. She lay in bed listening to the wind howl, a mournful sound that seemed to echo her own anxieties. At 3:30 in the morning, she gave up. This was absurd, she told herself, but the pull was undeniable. She pulled on her rain gear, the swish of the waterproof fabric a loud counterpoint to the storm's roar, grabbed a powerful flashlight and drove to the park. The world outside her car was a maelstrom of shivering branches and driving rain. The park, usually her place of peace, felt menacing and wild. She navigated through the darkness, her flashlight beam cutting a nervous path through the tumult, illuminating scenes of natural chaos, fallen branches, swirling vortexes of leaves. As she neared the clearing, her boots sinking into the saturated earth, she saw it. A second, weaker light bobbing low to the ground like a will-o'-the-wisp. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She clicked off her own powerful beam, relying on the ambient, stormy light. She crept closer, hiding behind the thick trunk of an ancient oak, its bark rough and comforting against her back. And then she saw him. It was an old man, impossibly thin, his back hunched against the wind. He was on his knees on the sodden ground, his face a mask of intense concentration under the brim of a worn cap. A small, battery-powered lantern sat beside him, casting a ghostly, intimate glow on his work. The bird had been ravaged, its elegant form torn into shreds, but he was painstakingly rebuilding it. He would pick up a single wet leaf, wipe it gently on the sleeve of his worn coat, and press it back into place. His hands, gnarled and spotted with age, moved with a slow, deliberate grace that defied the storm's fury. Every few minutes, his efforts were interrupted by a deep, rattling cough that shook his entire frame. It was a terrible, wet sound that seemed to be dredged up from his very core. He would brace himself with one hand on his knee, his shoulders heaving, until the fit subsided. Then, without a moment's hesitation, he would lower himself back to the earth and continue his quiet fight. Dana stood frozen, the rain dripping from her hood, forgotten. This wasn't a hobby. This was a pilgrimage. She was witnessing a quiet, desperate act of faith, a man refusing to let the chaos win. Overwhelmed by a sense of intruding on something sacred, she took a silent step back, then another, and retreated into the darkness, her own breath catching in her throat. A few days later, the sun shone brightly, mocking the memory of the storm. Dana's run felt different now. It was no longer a race against her own demons, but a journey toward a known, cherished secret. As she approached the sycamore grove, however, a new sound violated the morning's peace, the guttural roar of machinery. Her stomach tightened. Parked at the edge of the clearing were two municipal maintenance trucks. Two men in bright orange vests were wrestling with a massive, gas-powered leaf blower, its engine sputtering to life. They were about to erase everything. Panic propelled her forward. She ran, not with the measured pace of a jogger, but with the frantic sprint of a rescuer. As she burst into the clearing, she saw him. The old man, Franklin, was standing in front of his latest creation, a stunning mandala of interlocking circles. He stood between his art and the workers, his posture frail but unyielding. His voice, though thin, carried a note of dignified pleading. "Please," he was saying, "just this little spot. It won't take you long to go around." "Sorry, Pop," the younger worker said, not unkindly but with the finality of someone just doing their job. "Orders are to clear the whole section. We got a schedule to keep." That's when Dana arrived, breathless. "Stop." All three men turned to look at her. Franklin's eyes widened in surprise. The workers looked annoyed. Dana didn't hesitate. She strode forward, pulling the laminated ID from the pocket of her running shorts. It swung from its lanyard, a small shield of authority. "Dana Hayes, City Greenway Coalition," she announced, her voice steadier than she felt. This is a designated community art installation." The lie came easily, born of desperation. She turned to the crew chief, a burly man whose expression was a mixture of skepticism and weariness. "Look, I know your schedule is tight, but this piece is part of a project we're documenting. It has a special significance to the neighborhood. If you could just leave this clearing untouched, I will personally organize a volunteer crew to handle the maintenance for this specific area. I'll put it in writing and send it to your supervisor by noon." Her confidence, the official-sounding title, and the promise to take responsibility off their hands made the man pause. He grunted, looked from Dana to Franklin, then at the intricate pattern on the ground. He sighed, a long put-upon sound. "All right, lady, just this spot. But if my boss hears about it, it's on you." He gestured to his partner, and they began to haul the heavy machine back toward the path. The roar of the engine faded, leaving a ringing silence. Franklin turned to her, his face a canvas of bewilderment and profound gratitude. He looked at this stranger, this fierce, fast-talking young woman who had appeared from nowhere and defended his secret world. For the first time, he wasn't alone in his promise to Alina. The silence that settled over the clearing was thick with unspoken questions. Franklin looked at Dana, his pale blue eyes watery, and simply said, "Thank you." The two words were heavy with a lifetime of quiet dignity. Dana gestured to a nearby bench, one that was perpetually dappled in sun and shade. "Can we sit for a moment? I'm Dana, by the way." They sat, the space between them, charged with the energy of their strange encounter. Prodded by Dana's gentle, sincere questions, the dam of Franklin's solitude began to crack. For the first time in years, he spoke of Alina. He told Dana how they had met on a construction site. He a young foreman, she an architect with a revolutionary vision for using natural light. He spoke of their 53 years together, of her laughter, and of her deep belief that beauty was not a luxury, but a necessity, like air or water. "She loved this park," Franklin said, his voice growing thick. "After she got sick, we'd walk here. She'd point at the fallen leaves and say, 'It's not an end, Frank. It's a transformation.'" He explained that the patterns were his way of continuing their conversation, of showing her he was still listening. He spoke of his life in concrete, of building things meant to last forever, and the irony of now pouring his final energies into art that was designed to vanish. He carefully omitted any mention of his own diagnosis, framing his dedication as a Widhorse tribute, not a dying man's race against time. Dana listened, utterly captivated. This wasn't just a quirky hobby, it was a love story. When she got back to her office, the gray cubicle walls felt more oppressive than ever. The stack of paperwork for her stalled garden project seemed trivial, pathetic. Franklin's quiet, powerful defiance had put her own professional frustrations into stark perspective. He wasn't waiting for a committee's approval to create beauty. He was just doing it with his bare hands against the wind and the rain. She had to do something. A fire was lit within her. She started digging, not in the dirt of a garden but through the city's labyrinthine digital archives. She spent her lunch hour searching for grants, programs, anything. Finally, in a dusty corner of the municipal website, she found it. The Community-Led Artistic Contributor Commendation. It was an obscure honor, likely created by a well-meaning council member years ago and promptly forgotten. It was perfect. She began to write, pouring all her admiration for the quiet man in the park onto the application form. She attached the photos she'd been taking for weeks, a vibrant portfolio of his transient masterpieces. Then, taking another leap, she logged into a local neighborhood forum. Anonymously, she crafted a post. "The Secret Gardener of Laurel Creek Park," she titled it. She told the story of the ephemeral art, of its fragility, and of the need to protect it. She didn't ask for money or petitions. She simply asked if anyone would be willing to join a small group on Saturday morning to help care for the space around the art, to become its quiet guardians. On Saturday morning, Franklin woke before his alarm, a familiar ache in his chest serving as a grim rooster. He followed his ritual, moving through the pre-dawn chill toward the park, expecting the same solitude he always had. But as he approached the sycamore grove, he stopped dead in his tracks. His heart, which had been beating a slow, labored rhythm, gave a sudden, powerful thud. The clearing was bathed in the soft, golden light of the rising sun, and it was filled with people. There were at least a dozen of them, maybe more. A young couple with a baby in a carrier, a group of college-aged kids, a woman with silver hair who looked to be his contemporary. They weren't trampling his work. They were protecting it. Under Dana's calm direction, they moved around the periphery of his latest creation, a delicate weeping willow tree, using hand rakes and biodegradable bags. They worked with a quiet reverence, their hushed conversations and soft laughter like music in the morning air. A little girl, no older than 5, pointed at the leaf art and whispered to her mother, "Is this where the fairies live?" Her mother smiled and squeezed her hand. "Something like that, sweetie. We're here to help protect their garden." Franklin felt his composure, so carefully maintained for years, begin to crumble. A film of moisture blurred his vision. He stood at the edge of the scene, an invisible man made visible. A ghost suddenly returned to the world of the living. Just then, 2 more figures arrived. One was a young man with a camera and a notepad, a reporter from the local paper. The other was a woman in a smart pantsuit, her face familiar from campaign posters. It was Martha Jessup, his city councilwoman. Dana had done more than just call for volunteers. She had alerted the world. Councilwoman Jessup walked over to him, her hand extended. "Mr. Miller, Franklin Miller," she asked, her voice warm. "Dana told us we'd find you here. I've seen the pictures, but they don't do it justice." In front of the small crowd of volunteers and the clicking camera, the councilwoman presented him with a framed certificate. Franklin's trembling hands took it. Through the blur, he read the words, "In recognition of his unique and moving artistic contributions to our community." "We don't really have a title for what you do," Jessup said with a genuine, admiring smile. Dana, in her application, suggested one that I think is perfect. She called you our city's aesthetic scavenger. The title hung in the air, odd and perfect. An aesthetic scavenger, a man who salvaged beauty from what was discarded. Franklin clutched the certificate, its thin frame feeling heavier and more substantial than any block of concrete he had ever hoisted. He looked at the faces around him, strangers, neighbors, now guardians of his secret. He looked at Dana, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. He cleared his throat, the rattle less pronounced than usual, and managed to speak. "Thank you," he rasped, his voice thick with emotion. This is for Alina." A few months later, a small, tasteful bronze plaque was installed at the entrance to the Sycamore Grove. It read, "Alina's Grove, tended by Franklin Miller, our aesthetic scavenger." The name had stuck, becoming a small piece of local folklore. Franklin's body was weaker, the thief in his lungs more brazen. But his spirit, which had been shrinking for so long, now seemed to fill the whole park. He was no longer a solitary ghost. His work in the clearing had become a shared ritual. On any given morning, he would find a thermos of hot tea waiting for him on his bench, or a new volunteer would appear, ready to help sort leaves into color-coded piles. Sometimes people didn't come to help at all, but simply to sit in quiet companionship, watching him work. On a warm, late autumn afternoon, he and Dana sat on their bench, watching a group of schoolchildren gaze in wonder at his latest piece, a massive, sleeping fox curled in on itself. The air was peaceful, filled with the scent of dry leaves and the sound of distant laughter. He turned to her, his breathing shallow but even. "There's something I never told you, Dana." He finally told her about the diagnosis, about the handful of months the doctors had given him nearly a year ago. He spoke of it calmly, without a trace of self-pity, as if discussing the weather. It was just a fact, a condition of his existence. "You see," he finished, looking not at her, but at the children and the golden light filtering through the leaves, "you and all these people, you didn't just save my art. You gave my last days a meaning I never thought was possible. You showed me that a life's echo can be warmer and louder than the life itself." Dana felt tears well in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she reached over and took his hand, its skin as thin and textured as a dried leaf. She gave it a gentle squeeze. The sun broke through the canopy, casting a lattice of golden light over them both, a fleeting, perfect pattern on the ground.